Hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from Annie News, continuing with the cut content series for MUSHOKU TENSEI Season 2. We're going to be learning more about RUIJERDs' return, and I read comments on Crunchyroll, and I shouldn't have. And there was no spoilers for the next episode, apart from the fact that the next episode is where things start to spiral downwards for Rudy. I was expecting something like that. Eris being mentioned was a thing for me. I was like, oh god, hope this doesn't ruin the whole thing he's got going on with Sylphie. And did question it for a moment, didn't he? But be interested to see what was left out from the original source material, or what was maybe added. It was cool to see Rudy again. Let's go.
RUIJERD's return came with more than just two little sisters for Rudy. What the anime passed off as a relatively somber reunion was in actuality a revelation containing so much more. Specifically with regards to how Rudys perceived Eris's departure over the past few years. This wasn't just a simple passing thought, but instead a genuine concern that stuck with him for many days after. At least up until that incident with Norn. So, as we look at that and the introduction to Norn and Aisha, there's quite a bit in between that you're gonna want to hear about.
Okay.
Let's get started.
Alright.
Episode 40, Norn and Aisha, covering Chapter 12 from Volume 10 of the light novel and Chapters 1 to 3 from Volume 11.
Oh, right, so it's like one and okay, still 3 chapters though.
After having sat down with RUIJERD to reconnect, the first thing RUIJERD had asked was actually about Eris. The anime simply mentioned how things got complicated, but it was in the novels that Rudy recounted pretty much everything.
Huh?
From the moment he left to the night they spent after, Rudy told RUIJERD all about how Eris had left him. He then spoke of his despair and the 2 years he spent searching for Zenith, then his encounter with Alina Lise and even the recommendation from the man god. It was any and everything RUIJERD had missed, all the way up to Rudy's wedding.
So it was like, it could have been. I'm kind of glad they didn't do it. It was pretty much a recap then, wasn't it? Glad we kind of, in a way, I'm glad we managed to skip that.
Now, the reason RUIJERD was so confident that this was all just a misunderstanding was because to him this was something that happened often. As he explained to Rudy, something like this was an outlook warriors often got bogged down by. A mindset RUIJERD was certain Eris couldn't possibly hate Rudy with. So, that's when RUIJERD would suggest Rudy should think a bit more literally, and it was that thought which made Rudy reconsider everything. He began to wonder if it was him who got it all wrong. What if Eris really did just leave to get stronger? What if she was truly just trying to achieve balance then come back later?
Yeah.
If this was the true intent of the simple message she had left for him, then the meaning behind her words were also just as simple as "wait for me." It was a terrifying thought that made Rudy shudder at what it could possibly entail for him.
Oh god, yeah. Like, what if he starts thinking he hasn't waited long enough? Or, oh no.
Now that he had finally overcome his trauma and been saved by Sylphie, he couldn't imagine coming face to face with Eris again. Even if there was the chance that they could make things right, just the possibility of her rejecting him again was enough to make him want to avoid such an encounter. So, Rudy would change the topic to something else, and that's when we find out more about what it is RUIJERD had been doing.
Oh.
You see, his time in the
Cool.
southern forest was actually spent searching for Spurd. If they were going to be hiding anywhere, then this was the most likely out of all the places in the central continent. It was after 2 years of exhaustive searching, though, that no trace of his fellow Spurd could be found anywhere. He did find several items belonging to some unlucky casualties of the displacement incident, but no actual clues towards any of his own people.
Damn.
RUIJERD then headed to Eastport to catch up on information coming out of Millis, and that's where he met up with Paul.
Yes.
He was initially planning to
met
head
up.
to the conflict zone and search through there next, but after meeting Paul, that's when a little detour was decided. The chance encounter with him and Norn is actually something that happens in a bonus chapter, but rather than explain that detail for detail, the SparkNotes version is essentially this. Norn gets upset because she can't stay with Paul, storms off and gets into a bit of trouble, then gets saved by RUIJERD, who then walks her back to Roxy and Lilia.
Right.
Now, it was the speed in which they got here which highlighted Aisha's intellect, since not only did her suggestion ensure they traveled both during the day and night, but she had even optimized their path to ensure whichever caravan they were on was always the fastest. This sometimes involved doubling back to a city they'd already passed, since a caravan which left from there had a more direct route than a caravan from anywhere else. It was the first time in a while that RUIJERD had been ordered around like that, alluding to his time back when he was still the captain to Laplace. So, as Ruijerd worked as both caretaker and guard, Aisha too would tirelessly work to calculate the most efficient route for them. It was a no-breaks plan that took little account for stamina, eventually leading both her and Norn to collapse from exhaustion partway through. Now, if you're wondering why it is Ruijerd's only staying for less than a day, the main reason is because he heard rumors of a devil out in the woods.
Oh.
Since his goal was to find more of his people,
Yeah.
Ruijerd figured this
Because other people would call them that, so it's like, maybe they're referring to...
rumor
right,
was one worth investigating, one that was likely a little bit time-sensitive. This was the reason Ruijerd had given on the surface, but for Rudy he also couldn't help but feel like a rift had formed between them. He knew him not being with Eris likely came as a shock, but perhaps it was the two of them together that formed the foundation for all three of them to get along. I mean, there was a clear loneliness in the way Ruijerd spoke, and it was very likely Rudy being with Sylphie just didn't feel right to him. That's not to say Rudy regretted what he had done, but in this conversation with Ruijerd, he couldn't help but feel as if he'd made some kind of mistake. It was shortly after that Sylphie would come in and meet Ruijerd here, and the exchange between them was a little bit short. The full extent was an awkward handshake and a simple exchange of names. Ruijerd would then head upstairs and go to bed, and Sylphie would question if she'd done something to offend him. Of course, Rudy wasn't going to say that she did, but even he could tell that his marriage to Sylphie bothered Ruijerd a bit. As for where Ruijerd slept, since there wasn't any specific room that Rudy had picked out for him, Rudy just said
he slept in the sex slave dungeon.
that he could sleep anywhere. It may be a bit surprising to know he chose to sleep in Norn and Aisha's room, but Rudy understood that this was just part of who he was as a guardian. I mean, even when it was just him and Eris, Ruijerd never took his eyes off them even when they were sleeping. So, though to us it may seem like something strange, this was completely normal behavior for someone as protective as Ruijerd. Besides, if it was something suspicious, then Rudy knew Ruijerd never would have let his footsteps be heard in the first place. Now, the next morning started rather differently, since while normally Rudy would be horny beyond control, that sensation simply wasn't present today. The thought of Eris weighed so heavily on his mind that gloom and restlessness were the only emotions he was feeling right now. Still, he would get up and get ready to exercise, but as soon as he stepped outside, you know what was happening.
Yeah! Do we get more on this? Please give me more on this.
Standing in front of him was the immortal Demon King and the captain of the Plaza's Imperial Guard. Two warriors who fought on opposite sides and more than likely knew each other from all those centuries ago. You could tell that things were tense, since not only was Bodygotti not wearing his usual smile, but Rudy could sense Ruijerd's potent killing intent. He may have said how he had no intention of fighting, but his noticeable aura clearly dictated otherwise. As for the potential grudge these two shared, well, with Ruijerd having been a victim of the curse's madness, it was more than likely him and his comrades ended up killing some of Bodygotti's. Given their behavior was to attack any and everyone, there was no doubt that that had to have included some of Bodygotti's people. So, with Bodygotti being the king he is, it didn't matter that he was uncommitted to his role as such. If someone did wrong to his people, then it was likely he sought out revenge for them. And if not for something as petty as revenge, then perhaps he just acted in the way of justice on behalf of all his powerless citizens. Either way, there was no doubt Ruijerd killed some of Bodygotti's people, and Bodygotti went and got his revenge for it. This brought into question whether Bodygotti knew the truth of why the Spurred even acted that way, and it was something Rudy felt he needed to talk with him about. There's no explanation as to why Bodygotti just walked away at the end of it, but at the very least we now know a bit of his history. It seems there's at least one person that Bodygotti doesn't get along with. Now, one of the more important things to note from Ruijerd's departure is the extent to which Eris is affecting Rudy's handling of it. You see, while there are all these things and all these people Rudy wanted Ruijerd to see, this looming thought of Eris prevented him from asking Ruijerd to stay longer. Once again, it wasn't because of Sylphie, but was instead simply due to this feeling that he couldn't talk properly to Ruijerd until things were fixed with Eris. It's for that reason Rudy lets Ruijerd go, and it's a good example of just how much Eris is weighing on both of them right now. It's when we get to Rudy's conversation with his sisters after that a few minor details were left out from it. Aisha's mannerisms were way too formal for Rudy's liking, and it was something Aisha mentioned came from him. She was merely reciprocating the way Rudy talked to her before. It's not that speaking so formally was necessarily bad though, but it was almost as if Aisha took Rudy's politeness to mean he wanted to keep her distant from him. It made Rudy question if this was how it was when he talked to everyone, and even made him think perhaps he should start talking more casually to people. Aisha would then ask about Eris, and though you would expect Rudy to be rather discreet about it, he had actually given a basic rundown of pretty much everything that had happened. Minus all the more mature stuff, Rudy had given both Norn and Aisha an update on how his life has been. That's when Aisha would present Rudy with the chest, and within was enough money to last the three of them a decade.
Nice.
So long as Rudy spent it wisely, the funds Paul provided were actually quite plenty. Within the chest was also a letter from Lilia, and it was here that she had given her opinion on Norn and Aisha. To her, Aisha was extremely gifted, a child who knew she was smarter than others, and that unfortunately left her a little bit prideful. Norn, on the other hand, was completely ordinary, so when compared to her sister, who was objectively amazing, this left Norn both sullen and withdrawn. She did act tough to make herself seem stronger, but Lilia knew this was all just an act. So, given what Lilia knew, she advised Rudy to be strict with Aisha while at the same time be kind and gentle to Norn. They were instructions that seemed a bit unfair to Aisha, but perhaps this was Lilia seeing herself as Paul's mistress still. Perhaps if she acted like the second wife she officially was, then maybe she would have been less soft on Norn and more so to Aisha. Now, to further contrast Norn and Aisha's differences, whereas Aisha was beginner in Water God style and beginner in all 6 basic elements of magic, Norn was completely normal and average. She would test right in the middle of all her classes, whereas Aisha aced everything from literacy to geography. They were completely different in every way imaginable. This was clearly something Norn was very sensitive about, since while the argument in the anime was verbal at most, a bit of a fight broke out the more Aisha insulted her.
Ooh, wow, okay.
Norn had grabbed Aisha's hair first, then the two devolved into back and forth pushing and pulling. Luckily, it wasn't anything as serious as punching, but the tears in Norn's eyes made it clear topics like this were touchy. Now, the next day, Rudy would go schedule Norn and Aisha's test with Genius, and it was after that he would ask about Bodigadi. Unfortunately, Genius hadn't seen him, but if he did, he would tell him that Rudy was looking for him. Rudy would then go check up on Nanahoshi, and to his surprise, she wasn't doing any research at all. Since their party was just the day before, she was actually in bed groaning about her hangover and headache. The two would then go into a conversation about siblings, and aside from the rare compliment about Rudy's appearance, we would also find out Nanahoshi has a brother of her own.
Oh.
Sylphie would be who Rudy would meet up with last, and while the majority of their conversation was pretty much how we saw in the anime, an interesting question was posed which I think is important to the Sylphie-Ariel relationship. Rudy had asked if she would have accepted the marriage if he told her to quit her job first, and Sylphie responded simply by saying no.
Oh.
There was a good chance she would have turned him down in an ultimatum like that, since the love she felt for Ariel was just as strong as the love she had for Rudy.
Oh.
Yes, the types of love were
Okay.
fundamentally different,
Yeah.
but a love like that was enough to make Sylphie want to be there for her. Especially since Sylphie knew Ariel wasn't the type of person who could take care of herself alone. That's why Sylphie knew she couldn't abandon her, and though she felt it was kind of unfair to Rudy, it was a strong conviction she was willing to stand by. Of course, such a thing wasn't unfair at all, but to Sylphie she probably felt like she was taking advantage of Rudy. It was clear she felt bad that she had to split her time so much. Fast forward to after Norn and Aisha had taken their tests, and because Aisha had gotten a perfect score, not only did she earn the right to become Rudy's personal servant, but she'd also been offered admission as a special student. Of course, her desire trumped such a privilege, so it was from this point on that Aisha would be a maid. Norn, on the other hand, wasn't quite so exceptional, but the reason Rudy decided to give her what she wanted was because to deny her request may make her resent him more than she does already.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want her to dislike me as much as she does. Like, straight from the bat, she is not getting on with me. I do not want to make it worse.
Since he knew what it was like to be a shut-in himself, he also knew what not to do when trying to fix someone like that. You see, whenever his own family had tried to engage and make him feel better,
worse.
each time it had only made him withdraw further from them. To him, it made him feel like some sort of animal rather than a human. So, in an effort to make Norn feel like she wasn't trapped like how he felt, Rudy thought it was best to keep an eye on her from a distance. Plus, with Aisha always being so condescending, it was probably better for Norn's development if she didn't have to deal with all that. And since Rudy knew what it was like to grow up with exceptional siblings, he understood why such an environment would be so unappealing for her. That said, getting Aisha to understand this was a whole different problem. Since to her, Norn didn't seem like she deserved this treatment, Rudy needed to explain why without saying, "because I said so." That's when he would think back to what his parents would always say, and it was from this that he knew the basic answers just wouldn't work with her. Since they never satisfied him, he figured it was best to try something different. So, this was 3 examples where Rudy used his past life to his advantage, and they were all for the betterment of the sisters he was now taking care of. It's rather rare we see Rudy reflect on his past life so much, but I think it's important to know since it shows that he's learning from it. It exhibits a level of responsibility and compassion that may not have already been apparent in this scene. Now, to add a bit more context as to why Aisha felt so strongly about this, it essentially boils down to Lilia and the Latria family. What I mean is that if Aisha's own mother was never able to consider herself the second wife of Paul, then it makes sense Aisha would never feel equal herself either. Then with Zenith's family reinforcing this idea by treating her as this illegitimate daughter, it was only natural Aisha channel all that hate towards trying to be better than Norn. It's not like Paul treated them any differently himself, but with everyone else making that difference so apparent, such circumstances were all but bound to create a divide between them. Fortunately, none of those people were around anymore, so for Norn and Aisha this was kind of a fresh start for them. They both just needed to get past their own built-up mentalities first. So, it was a few days later that the decided plans would be put into action, and with Norn's enrollment pretty much secured, Aisha had settled nicely into her position as maid. The amount of chores she did extended far beyond just the ones we saw in the anime. She would even entertain guests whenever they came over, and the usual person was Nanahoshi when she wanted a bath. It was a level of hospitality Nanahoshi couldn't believe Rudy would force on his own younger sister.
Not forcing it, though.
It was in the rare times that she wasn't doing chores, though, that Rudy would sit her down and teach her magic.
She looks so happy.
You see, sure, beginner spells were enough for Aisha to live a normal life, but if she ever felt the need to defend herself, intermediate spells were absolutely necessary.
She looks so happy.
So, Rudy would have her exhaust her mana supply every day, then give her a few homework assignments to advance her knowledge of magic.
Nice.
It was at night that Aisha would occasionally sleep in the same bed as Rudy, then whenever Sylphie was home, that's when things got risky. What I mean is that with zero privacy and zero means to blow off steam the way that Rudy normally did, there was a build-up Sylphie knew Rudy needed to satisfy. This would lead to them doing it multiple times despite Aisha being in the next room over, and the only thing Rudy could do to mitigate her hearing was to barricade the door with earth magic.
Wow.
It was definitely risky, but more than necessary for him, especially with Sylphie always prodding to do more. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Season 2, Episode 16.
God.
I know I'm a week late, but you can expect the next episode within a couple of days or so. Now, before I go, if you saw this video, then you'd know I'm creating an officially licensed Overlord figure. I'm not just doing it by myself though, since the method in which I'm designing it is through all of you. Last week we voted on who we wanted the figure to focus on, now this week we're deciding on the type of scene it's going to be. So, if you want to vote and take part in helping to design an official part of Overlord, then be sure to click the link in the description and fill out the form there.
Although Shelty is cool.
As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao.
Ciao.
Oh, and a quick shout out to my buddy Andrew, who I lost a bet to on stream and now have to shout him out here. Okay, bye.
That's so random but cool that you actually went along with it. Wow, oh, I'm worried for the next episode. I am scared to find out what happens next, just because the comments were like, the next episode where it goes downhill. Just after Roger's been there. But then also they said that Roger does not appear for a very, very long time after that now as well, which is a shame. But yeah, like, I love it. I love MUSHOKU Tensei so much, and then I love seeing the differences, like the whole and I hope when Tower of God comes out, he's gonna do Tower of God cut content like he did with Season 1, because I absolutely loved the Tower of God cut content, and I absolutely loved Tower of God Season 1, man. So please, Anime News, please do Tower of God cut content, or at least just like how you're doing with that Time was Reincarnated Slime right now. Like, just every now and then do a video about stuff, because I'm so excited with Tower of God, and I remember when I was watching Tower of God, you made it even more exciting by doing the cut content. So anyway, Thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video, I want to be able to watch patron-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series. Link is in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all I ask to help support the channel. It's greatly appreciated. Thanks for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys next time.